In 415, the most respected mathematician in the ancient world was murdered by a mob in Alexandria. She ran the most important school of mathematics and philosophy in the known world. Students came from across the Mediterranean. Her name was Hypatia. She was the daughter of the renowned mathematician Theon. She surpassed her father in every discipline. After her death, the mathematics she had preserved would not be independently rediscovered in Europe for 800 years. Her name was removed from church-controlled records within a century of her death. The erasure was systematic and total. The murder was documented by a contemporary historian. The erasure that followed was recorded only by the silence around it. Hypatia lived and worked in Alexandria from roughly 350 to 415 of the Common Era. She was a Neoplatonist philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer, and the head of the Platonic school in Alexandria. Her father, Theon, was a mathematician who edited the works of Euclid. Hypatia edited and substantially improved his work. She wrote commentaries on Diophantus Arithmetica, on Apollonius Conics, and on Ptolemy astronomical works systematically. Her commentaries survived not under her name but embedded in editions attributed to male scholars who came long after her. She advised Roman prefect Orestes on civic matters. Her political influence made her powerful and therefore dangerous to some. Bishop Cyril of Alexandria had a prolonged conflict with Orestes. Hypatia, as Orestes' key advisor, became a target in that struggle. In March 415, a Christian mob intercepted her carriage, dragged her into a church, and murdered her. The mob then burned her library. Centuries of accumulated mathematical and philosophical knowledge were destroyed in that single act. The contemporary source for Hypatia murder is historian Socrates Scholasticus, writing in his ecclesiastical history around 439. He named the mob, described the murder in precise detail, and attributed it to the political conflict between Cyril and Orestes. Cyril of Alexandria was later made a saint. His role in Hypatia's death was not an obstacle to that official designation. Historian Maria Zielska published the definitive modern biography of Hypatia in 1995, after decades of primary source research. Zielska reconstructed Hypatia's circle of students from their surviving letters, identifying her full political and intellectual network precisely. One student, Synesius of Cyrene, became a bishop. His letters to Hypatia calling her teacher survived in church archives. Those letters survived only because Synesius became a bishop. Without his ecclesiastical status, they would have been destroyed with everything else. The works she edited and commented on survived the centuries. Her name was removed. The knowledge existed. The attribution was erased. Modern mathematical historians have identified specific manuscript passages as Hypatia work based on style and content analysis. Her Euclid edition became the standard version used across Europe for 1,000 years. It bears no attribution to her. The version of Ptolemy Almagest that transmitted ancient astronomy to the medieval Islamic world passed through her careful editing first. The significance of 415 is not only Hypatia's death. It marks the last moment of the classical Alexandrian intellectual tradition. Mathematical knowledge she taught was not lost everywhere. Arab scholars in Baghdad preserved and extended it from the 8th century. The Diophantus commentaries she wrote survived in Arabic translation and returned to Europe in the 12th century as new discoveries. Europe received these works as original Arab scholarship. The Greek origin and Hypatia's specific role were both entirely invisible by then. The astrolabe Hypatia helped develop with her father became one of the most important medieval astronomical instruments worldwide. Navigation, astronomy, and timekeeping all depended on the astrolabe. All depended partly on Hypatia work. No attribution appeared anywhere. The mathematical gap in Europe between 500 and 1300 was not a global regression. It was regional and specific. It was caused by specific political decisions in specific places and times, not by any inevitable decline in human intellectual capacity. Hypatia did not cause that gap by dying, but her murder destroyed the institution most capable of preventing it from widening. Within 50 years of her death, the Neoplatonist school in Alexandria had closed. The tradition she represented was finished in Egypt. Cyril of Alexandria was made a doctor of the church in 1624. His role in Hypatia's death was not mentioned. Hypatia appeared in no church calendar. She appeared in no mathematician hall of fame. Her name appeared in footnotes at best. The institution that killed her controlled the narrative of what happened and who was worth remembering for many subsequent centuries. The people who preserved surviving records benefited from her erasure. That is not a coincidence. It is the structural fact. Zielska, 1995 biography, was the first serious modern attempt to reconstruct Hypatia's actual intellectual contributions from primary sources. Before her book, most descriptions of Hypatia were romantic myths, the beautiful pagan martyr, not the working mathematician she actually was. Mathematical historian Wilbur Knorr identified specific sections of surviving Euclid commentaries as Hypatia's original work. His analysis showed the standard Euclid edition used throughout the medieval world was built on her careful editorial work. The letters of Synesius give the clearest picture of Hypatia as a teacher who wrote to her on mathematics and philosophy. He described her surrounded by students from the most powerful Roman families, all choosing her school over every other available. The Suda, a 10th-century Byzantine encyclopedia, describes Hypatia as surpassing all contemporary philosophers in mathematical knowledge. That encyclopedia was compiled 500 years after her death. Even then, the record still acknowledged what she had actually been. The gap between what the Suda says and what the history of mathematics currently teaches is not an accident of archiving. It is the consequence of who controlled which documents and attributions in the centuries between her death and the printing press. Her name survived in fragments, student letters, a Byzantine encyclopedia, a hostile church history. Nothing in her own hand remains. The erasure of Hypatia from mathematics history was not a single event. It was centuries of consistent and deliberate attribution choices. Each time her edited works were copied, the choice was made to attribute them to the institution rather than to her. The Euclid edition she produced became the standard. Her name was replaced by Theon, then Theon was replaced by the institution. By the time European universities were studying Euclid in the 13th century, Hypatia's role was entirely and completely invisible. The Victorian era rediscovered Hypatia and turned her into a romantic tragedy, the beautiful pagan killed by barbaric Christians. That framing was still an erasure. It replaced her mathematical work with her death and her intellect with her appearance. Serious mathematical scholarship on Hypatia did not begin until the 20th century. By then, the myth had replaced the mathematician. The institution that killed her outlasted any organization that might have preserved her name. That is the fundamental structural fact. What persisted was what the surviving institution chose to preserve. What was erased was what threatened the legitimacy of that institution. The history of mathematics as taught in universities today still does not include Hypatia as a named contributor to Euclid. The city of Alexandria still exists. The Library of Alexandria does not. The mathematical tradition Hypatia preserved is still being used. Every student who has ever studied Euclid elements has studied a text that Hypatia edited. Most will never know her name. The murder of 415 is documented. The erasure that followed is documented. The restoration of her name is still incomplete. The mathematics survived. The knowledge survived. The name of the person who preserved it was the only thing that did not. The silence around Hypatia was not what history forgot. It was what the institution that outlasted her chose not to remember.